When the moon is conjunct Rahu or Ketu, or the closest planet, or very close to Rahu and Ketu, it's obviously going to be very important because the nodes are the nodes of the moon. And here we got the moon with one of them. So the moon is the consciousness, and Rahu and Ketu are the path that the consciousness needs to take to grow. But when the moon with Rahu or Ketu, then that moon is not really wanting to take that path. It wants to be on one end of the path. The idea of a path is that you're taking a journey somewhere. You're taking a journey from Ketu to Rahu. And back again. It's a path, something we walk. Whenever Ketu or Rahu is with the moon, then a person is not really wanting to walk that path somehow. They're stuck either in the Ketu or in the Rahu more. Instead of seeing it as a more of a journey. Okay, so it becomes difficult anytime you see Ketu with the moon or Rahu with the moon. Okay, I'll explain that more as I go here. So ultimately, our consciousness is really about feeling. Okay, I mean it's not just consciousness is not intellect exactly. When we use our intellect, we feel a certain way. When we do anything, we have a feeling, a deeper experience that is the consciousness sensing what's happening. So whatever we do, our consciousness is what's sensing and experiencing what is happening. And that's actually separate than, the part of our brain, the intellect that is doing that thing. So if we, let's say we love to study, like I like to study, you guys like to study, obviously. So if you love to study, you're using your intellect. But it's not your intellect that's feeling good and vitalized and happy from doing the studying. It's your consciousness that's feeling that, okay? And that's what the moon is. It's this consciousness that's, connecting to the experience, whether it's an intellectual experience, a physical experience, a difficult experience, or a pleasant experience, okay? And the moon is planet number 2, which is a planet of connecting. So it's how we're connecting to our experiences. And our consciousness does that. And it does that as a sensation, okay? As a feeling of some type. But I don't want to say feeling because it's a deeper experience than like an emotional feeling, what we truly call an emotional feeling. It's a closer to, it's a deeper level of experience than that. Okay, so when the moon's with Ketu, the need is to feel a certain way, to experience life in a certain way, okay? For the consciousness to have a type of experience, okay? Now, if the consciousness is having very deep spiritual experiences that it really doesn't need other experiences, that's great, but that's rarely the case. More often the case is the person has fixated themselves or gotten stuck on experiencing life in a certain way, in a certain flavor. And they're not very open to feeling, experiencing life in a different way. So Ketu moon, when it gets to a crossroads in its life that require it to feel different, to get a different experience of something, to get a different sensation of something, they really resist it, okay? One of the consistent things I've seen with this, with Ketu moon people, particularly women with Ketu moon, because in relationships the moon is more important in a woman's chart, is that when they start having problems in relationships, there's a point where, okay, I have to start experiencing certain things, certain other feelings in order to resolve these problems. And that's when they shut down. They don't want to go there. They just don't want to go to certain feelings, certain levels of experiences. One client I had, his wife he divorced. They got divorced. They were having problems, and he was a really great guy actually. And he worked hard, tried to make it work with her, asked her to go to counseling, wanted him to tell her, he asked her to tell him what was going on, tell her what she's feeling, really trying to figure out why aren't you happy. And she didn't want to go there. She just didn't want to go to the level of feeling what was really bothering her, to go to that level of sensation. And so she just decided it was easier for her to just not be with that guy. She didn't want to go to a different feeling experience. Because when you have problems in your relationships, there's all these tumultuous and strange and confused and buried feelings creating those problems. And if a person doesn't want to dive into them, they're not going to resolve their relationship problems. So she had just no interest in going there. She didn't want to talk about it. She didn't want to hear about counseling. And they had kids, and she was just like, I'm out of here. You know, she just didn't want to go there where she had to go to resolve things. And so you'll see that with the K2 moon. They only feel comfortable going to certain places with their emotions. All right. Now, as I said, K2, because it has such a need for something with the K2 moon, it's the need to experience life in a certain way, to feel a certain way inside of themselves, that when pressures are there that's controlled now. It becomes a controlled experience. Because remember I said K2 always controls. So basically K2 controls the person's experiences and only allows their moon to be open to certain experiences that they've deemed as okay. That as long as I'm feeling this way, it's okay. But if I start feeling any other way, it feels very threatening and they shut down and clam down. Okay, it's kind of like, you know, K2 Castle. It's the city, it's the village that's well guarded and well regulated. And the only music you're allowed to play is, say, opera. You can't play any other music but opera in this town. The minute you show up at the gates with your boombox, you know, on your shoulder with, you know, listening to rap or something, they just slam the doors on you. You know, before you get to the doors are slammed. And that's what it's like with the K2 moon person. There's only certain vibrations allowed that person willing to experience. And anything different, whether it's a worse difference or better difference, slam those doors. It's like that's how controlled their openness is to connecting to life. Because all of life gives us an experience. It gives us a different sensation. So one experience gives us a certain sensation, another experience gives us another sensation. And the sensation is the deepest level of our consciousness that's experiencing something. Okay? And when I talk about when we get into a new Nakshatras course, I'll talk a lot about this sensation idea, because it's actually related to the Nakshatras. So, when we're getting this, you know, the moon is the planet that's open to all sensations. Okay, it's receptive. It's willing to connect to the next sensation, to the next deep feeling experience, the next response of the consciousness, because that's what sensation is. It's how the consciousness is responding. Okay? Once the consciousness responds, we start telling ourselves stories about that response, and then out of those stories we get an emotional arousal. So the sensation is 2 steps deeper than what we call our emotions, actually. So it's a very deep level of experience, okay? So the moon is open to all that, and it responds and it experiences, and it is where we have our sensation, okay? But the K2 moon person has decided only certain sensations are permissible. Only certain types of music can be played in this castle. And any other tones, any other vibrations, they slam the doors on. Okay? And so, of course, that's going to make it hard for these people to grow. Because growth is all about getting new sensations that shift us and cause us to go, aha, to get a realization. We do that through the experiences that are thrown at us and the sensations that arise within us. Okay? So it can be a very limited thing to have the K2 moon. Now, in charts of spiritual people, if you get a strong spiritual chart, then the person might be at the point where they've decided that they only need, you know, divine sensations, and they're really focusing on their spiritual life. So you'll see that sometimes, but it's not usually the case. Usually the case, it's somebody who's decided to control what they're going to sense in life, what experiences they're going to relate to, what experiences they're going to connect to. And they won't allow themselves to connect to other ones. And you'll see them, they usually act very polite, very nice. They're very likable people. They don't want to create frictions that force them to feel a certain sensation, you know, to feel just uncomfortable and so on. So they're usually very pleasant, easy to get along with, very polite. But you'll be able to tell in their eyes as you communicate or with them that there's certain things they're just not connecting to. You know, they're acting all nice, like they care, but then if you look in their eyes, you can see they're not really connecting to that thing, because that thing or that person, whatever, would cause them to have a sensation that they've decided isn't the ones they want to have. Okay? So the moon is the planet of connection. They need to connect, but they need to connect in a certain way, okay, under a controlled way. But, the moon was never designed to connect in a certain way. The moon has a round body, right? It's supposed to roll around and connect in any way it can. It's supposed to connect along the path of least resistance, but always find a connection. So these people don't do that. They only are open to certain connections. Okay, so their connection is overly controlled to just certain things. And so oftentimes these people end up being very alone at times in their life, or they'll be in periods where they feel very alone because they're not allowing themselves to connect enough. And ultimately, it's those feelings of, ultimately realizing how isolated they begin to feel that start breaking down the castle walls of K2 and saying, wow, I have to connect to something else. I'm feeling too isolated. So ultimately, the sensation they get is the sensation of isolation. Okay? And when that sensation of isolation becomes great, it can break it can shatter, literally shatter is the right word here. It can shatter the walls that are holding their emotions and only allowing them to experience certain things. And when that happens, they'll usually have a huge breakdown, like a momentary breakdown, where they'll just slip into this deep, dark abyss, some kind of mood or something, and with a lot of despair, lots of feelings of isolation. And they'll usually want to keep that very private, okay? And in keeping it private, they reduce the impact upon themselves of how other people are relating to them because they're in that space, which would arouse more sensations in their bodies, in their consciousness, that they, again, don't really want to experience. So they tend to have their bad moments deeply hidden and away from everybody. And when they're on the verge of going into a bad moment, a moment of despair and feelings of isolation and feeling a lack of connectivity, they will usually withdraw and want to be alone. That's when they'll disappear a little while, have to go do something, I'm not able to make it today. And then when they do that, you can be sure they're having a big tear-jerking moment of their own somewhere on the floor in their house, okay? At that point, they're in a fully feeling way, and they're feeling all that isolation, because when only certain connective experiences are allowed, a person's going to feel disconnected a lot of the time. And the moon wants to be connected always. A healthy moon, a nice moon, is a moon that's always connecting honestly to the moment. Whether it's a pleasurable or unpleasurable moment, it's experiencing life because it's connected. But the K2 moon can't do that, so it's so often feeling disconnected. But then that isolation, that despair that they fall into, eventually becomes strong enough that it makes them realize they need something else. At that point, they're very ready to go into the Rahu house, okay? When these people go to the Rahu house, it usually happens all of a sudden, okay? So they'll be living their very limited, connective, sensational experiences for forever. And then all of a sudden, boom, it can shift so fast, okay? So these people, when they do decide it's time to make the shift, they make a very rapid and unexpected shift. So these people can have huge midlife crises, where, when that Rahu maturation comes and the midlife crisis is starting, their lives can just turn around dramatically. One of the sad things about the K2 moon is that, I've known a lot of K2 moon people and had a lot of K2 moon clients, I find that there's a point where they always disappear. I've never found one to be a long-term client or a long-term associate. Because I think in every human relationship, whether it's as a counselor or a friend, there comes a point where you have to start connecting in a different way to keep going with that person. Circumstances change, people change, and so different connections, different sensations are aroused between the people. And when and the K2 moon person, because they don't want to experience feel certain things beyond what they've decided is okay to feel, when those start happening, they tend to come out of our lives. So I don't have as many stories of long-term, I don't have like stories of long-term people I know that I've seen for years and years, personally or as clients, who had K2 moons and were in this place and went to this place. But I have seen them that when their midlife crisis comes, although I wasn't working with them before that, where they make radical changes at that point, okay? That's where everything seems to catch up with them emotionally. And there's just so much emotional need at that point that they can have huge shifts in their lives at that time. And when those huge shifts happen, good luck trying to stop them. So if you've got a spouse with a K2 moon conjunction, and at 42 they decide they want to be divorced, there's no way in hell you're going to be able to save that marriage. There's nothing you can do or say is going to work. At that point, their emotions are just busting out as irrationally as possible to get them into a better place for themselves to grow. And there's really no stopping the midlife crisis of a K2 moon person, okay? Which is a good thing. But until then, it'll seem like no growth is happening, no shifting is happening. But when it happens, like it all happens in a very quick and short time. So if you see these people appearing very stagnant, don't give up on them. Look at their charts as normal. Look at it. What's the potential of this chart? Because when the time is right, they're going to just take one giant step. That's how they usually work, okay? So when they have breakthroughs, they're huge breakthroughs. The same way that when they have emotional breakdown, it's a huge emotional breakdown. So these people might be sounding like sort of scary people, but the truth is, they're really quite wonderful people to be around. I've never met a person with the K2 moon conjunction that I didn't really just like. We don't, in a woman's chart, we don't want moon with K2 or moon with the malefic like K2. It makes them a little tougher to handle in a relationship, so you can see how this person would have more difficulties in relationships. But the truth is, women who have a K2 moon conjunction are really wonderful to spend time with. I mean, they're really, really nice people. There's something about them that is very uplifting. And what K2 moon people have is that because they've decided to, only experience certain things, only relate and connect to certain things, they've done that in a way to make themselves feel as good and happy as they can be. And so they have this nice kind of quality to them that makes it feel good to be around them. And they walk into a room and people notice. When they're feeling good, they walk into a room and it kind of uplifts everybody, actually, because their emotional body, because it's controlled and it's kind of anchored and strong in where they're at. So everyone else's energy can't pull them down. So when they walk into the room, they're more likely to pull everyone else's energy up. So when you're around an up K2 moon person, it's really, really great to be around them. I mean, it's as fun as it can be around a person. They are uplifting. And these people, because they, have closed the doors on other sensations, when they're around a really depressed person, it doesn't pull them down. They pull the depressed person up. So they're really great psychologists, counselors, friends for those in need, because they're not going to get dragged down into that person's misery. They're not going to connect to that negative sensation of that person. They're going to stay where they're at, and the other person's going to have to move up to where they're at. And so I find them to be very uplifting people in general. Now, when they get into their mood, because they're very moody, they'll slip into these moods, and usually you won't be around. But if you happen to be around, there is no possible way in hell you can really uplift them. It doesn't matter. Trying to uplift a K2 moon person who has gone into their hour or two of despair and hair pulling and rolling around on the floor and crying episode, there's no comforting that person at that point. There's nothing external that will comfort them. They have to release all that pain that's been bottling up over the time, and then they'll be good and ready to go. And then they're just wonderful people around. And so I love K2 moon people, but it's unfortunate that because they are rigid in what they're allowing themselves to experience, they usually are not staying in people's lives that long, okay? Because as other people change, they can't continue to connect with them on that level, and so they move on. But then they have their big shifts. When their big shifts happen, really anything's possible. Okay, so it's a really interesting combo. Listen to that in the other set of videos too. Okay, so that's the connective part of the moon, which is really the most important part of it. And that's, I talked about the round part of the moon. Okay, another thing about the moon that's really, really important is that the moon is, all-knowing. She's intuitive. She knows things, okay? So the K2 moon person has a really strong need to follow their intuitions, okay? To follow their inner feeling, okay? And that sometimes is where things can become a bit difficult for the people around them. They have to follow this inner feeling, but they follow it in such an isolated fashion that it's easy for them to make others feel like they don't even care about that person at times when they start following what they feel they need to do. Because usually when somebody feels they need to do something, what they do is they go talk to their friends about it, they talk to their parents about it, they talk to their lovers, their spouse about it. They talk to the people in their lives and get their feedback and get ready for it. So you kind of know what they're gearing up for, But a K2 moon person, they just get this feeling, they say, okay, this is what I'm doing. And next thing you know, they're doing this. You're like, huh? I'm your partner and I'm your friend and you didn't even tell me about this. Don't you even care about us? And so it can feel that way. It can really feel like you've been totally rejected out of their lives. And they just, intuited this big need to change something in their lives. They didn't even talk to you about it the way most people love to talk about every little bit of drama in their lives, okay? So, that's nice in a way because they won't drag you into a lot of drama, but then at times you can feel just left out of their lives. So be aware of that. There is a strong need for them to, act upon their deepest feeling. And when they act upon that, they don't need feedback, they don't need your input, they don't need everyone to say, yeah, they're not going to put it on Facebook and say, hey, what do you guys think if I do this? None of that. They won't even ask their closest, most intimate person usually about feedback for it. They just show up and say, look, I decided to do this. And you're like, what? So that can be a big surprise if you're dealing with a Moon K2 person sometimes. Because when the feeling comes for them to do something, it's very, very strong and powerful. And it's strong and powerful enough that they don't really need to relate and connect to other people's ideas to sort it out. So be aware of that. For that same reason, you don't see a whole lot of Moon K2 people coming to counselors or astrologers. Okay, you won't see a lot. This will be, when you get a Moon K2 person that comes in, you want to really examine them because you might not see another one for a while. Okay, so this is your chance to study one under the microscope and get a good feel for them. You will see less of them simply because they are in charge. K2 likes to be in charge and control because it's that regulated castle. They're in charge of their emotional and they're in charge of the experiences they're going to have. Going to an astrologer is basically saying, okay, tell me something I don't know. Tell me something to shock me. Tell me something to shake my cage. Tell me something to surprise me. And those are all things the K2 moon person isn't really looking for. Okay? Some things that can really hurt a K2 moon person is really huge surprises. Like big surprises shock them. For instance, if someone, like one example I had of a K2 moon personality was a girl who was with her first boyfriend, so her high school boyfriend for years, and obviously totally in love. And he went away on a trip somewhere, and when he came back, he met a girl. And he just came back and said, oh, I met another girl, we're over. Boom. And the girl just fell apart. She just absolutely fell apart because that created a sensation in her that she was absolutely unprepared for. So they don't do well when they're confronted with something they're absolutely unprepared for. That's a huge shock because they like to be in control of what they're going to experience. And with little things, they can slam the door on it. But something like that, you can't close the door onto the feeling of how you feel when your only love shows up and just casually says, yeah, I met another girl, we're over. It's like, what? You know? So they can be very, very delicate in that respect when it comes to huge, huge shocks. And this particular person became so damaged by that, like severely damaged, like on an emotional level. I don't know if she ever got over that shock. During the 3 years or so that this person was someone I was working with, and I was looking at their chart, you know, they never got over that. And I don't, you know, and then of course, because they're a K2 moon person, they disappeared from my life and from my practice. But I noticed that, you know, over the grapevine and mutual clients and stuff like that, for a couple more years, I did hear from this doctor that I knew that knew this person as well. I got a little bit of feedback, and it wasn't really promising. So I don't know if, you know, if when her Rahu maturation came, if she was able to shift out of that. But the shock was just that damaging. So on lots of things, the K2 moon is very resilient. But when something comes that can break them, it's very hard for them sometimes to get repaired, okay? It's kind of like, you know, the moon is supposed to be flexible, and that's how the moon works. You know, the moon, because it's flexible, it allows a person to bend with life, you know, and, you know, it gives us the flexibility. Moon's like water. No matter how hard you hit the water, it's always going to come back to level, right? No matter what you do to water, it's going to level out. You can boil water, it's just going to go up and rain and come back down, you know? So water, which is the moon, has this resiliency that makes it undestructive, okay? But then you drop K2 with it, and all of a sudden that water is crystallized, okay? Because really any planet with K2 sort of becomes crystallized, you could say. When something's crystallized, it's hard. It's like ice now. And yes, ice can be broken. Another K2 moon person was a man, and this person fell in love with the girl, madly in love with the girl, and she dumped him for another guy. I think it was another guy. It was so long ago, at the very beginning of my practice. She dumped him for another guy. It just broke his heart. He was devastated. He spent a year devoting himself to his spiritual life, trying to get over this girl, trying to heal from this. And he just couldn't. He was a hurting unit, even though he was meditating 25 hours a week, serving at temples, you know, really making the spiritual effort for a solid year. And that's when I met him. I read his chart, and, you know, he eventually left, and he tried to make things work with that girl again. You know, he still didn't get over her, even after a year of like trying to meditate it out of his system. Went back, and she didn't want to be with him, and he killed himself. You know, he actually killed himself over this girl because the shock of, you know, that powerful sensation of breaking and loss literally shattered him. And even though he tried to get better, he was just not able to get better. So I heard from a mutual friend, like a year after he left the temple where I met him, that he went back home, tried to, you know, get that girl to love him again. She didn't want anything to do with him, and he just killed himself, you know. So that's the kind of things that K2 moon can do. If they get a hit that's so hard, they can't bend and absorb it, they can break. And when that break happens, they need some serious therapy, some serious treatment to recover from it. And back in those days, I really didn't have the tools, and I didn't read his chart enough anyway, but even if he'd come in every day, I don't know if I'd had the tools to like really help someone who's got a shattered moon K2. And so, you know, these people, if they go into a big shock, you really want to really guide them towards maybe more professional help sometimes, because they really need to repair themselves. Sadly, they rarely want to go get that help, you know, because the K2 moon, like I said, they don't want to go to counseling usually. You know, when I did do this person's reading, they weren't that interested in actually healing. They weren't interested in learning about their pain. They really just came for is she gonna come back? That was really the only thing they wanted to know. You know, it's like they weren't gonna allow anything else to heal them other than, you know, will she be back or not? And so when a person's in that place, you have to, it takes a lot of skill to even get them into a place where they're really going to be ready to heal. And that's something you're always going to deal with a K2 moon person, is getting them into the space where they're ready to heal. So if you're married to one or you love one and they got some troubles, it's like trying to get them into a place where they allow themselves to heal can be really hard until they're ready to make that big shift. And that big shift usually doesn't come until they really fall into a real state of emotional despair. Okay? So that's a tough combination, no doubt. I mean, you have moon conjunct a node, it's going to be tough, okay? But the basic idea is there's a need to experience life a certain way, and life's just not going to follow that plan. And so it's kind of a battle between what they feel they need to experience and how they need to feel, and how life makes them want to feel, wants to make them feel. And eventually, you know, life is going to win. And at that point, they have to, you know, let go of a lot of things and allow themselves to be open to things that they never thought they could handle. And they have to learn how to handle them. They literally have to learn how to handle things that they don't think they can handle, that they're scared to experience, okay? Because eventually life will throw something at them that they don't think they can handle, they don't think they can experience. And it takes a lot to be able to experience those things because, like I said, the moon doesn't have that resiliency that is normally there. So a tough position for sure, as you might imagine. But then at the same time, I said these are very likable people, they're kind people, they're well-behaved people. I explained a lot of why that is in the other video on this. And again, ultimately, what's the purpose of this? What's the purpose of this? The purpose is there's a point where the ego, because K2 has a lot to do with the ego. Remember, Saturn is connected to K2. There's a point where the ego says, this is all that I am. And with every K2 conjunction, there's always something that says, this is all that I am. Okay? And what I am is really not able. No matter how able we are. When you meet these people, they seem emotionally really well off until that thing comes that breaks their moon. Okay, and then they're train wrecks. But until then, they're emotionally very centered people, you know, because there's always that ableness of that K2 gives to any planet. But that ableness is never well-rounded. Okay, it's an ableness based on a very narrow paradigm of certain type of experiences, and especially for the moon, it's very narrow experiences. So they're very able in certain experiences, but they feel very unable. They don't feel like they can take a lot, you know? And so they literally become rigid in what experiences they allow themselves to feel because they don't feel like they can handle other ones. And ultimately they have to just, you know, through, you know, handling them, through getting them and not dying, basically grow into being able to handle more things. It's really a strange dynamic to see because, you know, when they're on top of the world, there's no one else like them. They just shine, you know, and so it's hard to imagine how they can be broken when the wrong thing hits them, okay? But like I said, the ego, K2 has a lot to do with the ego. The ego has this narrow definition of its existence, and that narrow definition is, this is working, therefore it should always work. And emotionally, they say, I'm working emotionally, and I'll always be able to work this emotionally, but they won't be. Because something will come on in their life that gives a different emotional experience that they're completely unprepared for. Another K2 story was a woman who, because I've given you like the negatives, I'm going to give a positive one here, of how, you know, people get these, I give two kind of examples of when people had this very sudden shock of an emotional experience, how it broke them. Another K2 person was someone who, for the first time, met someone who was just really into her, like really enamored by her. And, you know, treated her like in ways that she could have never imagined being treated. And of course, that aroused all kinds of feelings. And she couldn't survive those feelings. Those feelings were too new, too different for her to handle, And he, he was a capable person, and the feelings he, aroused in her were just too much for her to handle. And so she shut down again. So whether it's a good feeling that's a new experience or a negative feeling that's a new experience, the K2 moon will try to shut either one out because it just doesn't have that flexibility to adapt to a more wonderful experience or to a really shocking, difficult experience. So it can happen either way, so be careful with it. So if you meet a moon K2 person, you always have to relate to them on the level of experiences that they're ready to handle. Any more than that, or anything worse than that, no, they would just slam the castle gates shut. Okay? There's it's very narrow what they allow themselves to experience. But again, pain forces them out of that. Eventually the pain builds up where they have a deep need to experience something, and then they might just do something really unexpected of themselves. And that's a good sign. When a K2 moon person does a radically unexpected thing, it's usually a very good sign. And they won't get there until they hit a level of despair where they just can't survive anymore. Okay? But until then, they're going to present themselves the same way for possible years and years and years, with really not a lot of change to their identity. They have a strong need to, because the moon has a lot to do with our identity, how we see ourselves. They have a very strong need to see themselves in a certain way. And so they'll create an identity, a persona that they feel comfortable with. And they won't want to change that. So if you meet someone, you can meet a girl at 16 and then you meet her at 40 and her hair will be the same. They'll hold on to their identity to that degree. And I use a woman in that example because it's not common to meet a girl at 16 and 40 and have them have the same hair, because girls love changing their hair. But if they do, you can guess there's some moon K2 stuff going on in their charts. Okay, so there's this desire to hold on, and men of course tend to keep their hair more common, but you'll see the same type of things in moon K2 men. This need to create a sense of identity and to hold on to that sense of identity with as little fluctuations as possible. Okay. So it's an ironic combination because on the outside there's very little that seems to be wanting to grow. But things are building up. It's like a volcano that's building up. And eventually that volcano is going to blow. And then there's a big change. Okay? And that's how you can expect these people to grow. Not in, smooth, harmonious, gradual steps, but in like this and boom. Just like an eruption of growth that takes place at some point. So very interesting, but you won't see that many of them because they're not inclined to want to come to the astrologers unless they are the kind of people who really care, unless they're like more materialistic and they really just want predictions. But they aren't going to want to hear about a lot of the counseling stuff usually. They're not going to want to hear about their feelings and how they could feel different. They're usually not going to want to go there. So be aware of going there with them because you have to wait till they're ready to make that shift. And then when they are, they're very capable of growth. But it's just going to happen in a very different way. So they're not any more stunted than anyone else or anything. It's just they're going to grow in a very different way. Okay? I think that's enough about the moon K2. I might think of some more things as we go on to moon Rahu. Okay, so moon Rahu, or moon close to Rahu, is obviously, as I mentioned, one of the difficult things. Because, Rahu has to do with... let me step back. I knew I had something else to say about the K2 moon. So K2 is a black gem, right? There's literally this void, this abyss of emotions within the K2 moon person. They literally have a depth of emotions that is, it's such a deep abyss. They have a black hole of emotions in them. And they're trying to stay on the rim of that abyss. And they do not want to fall into that abyss, They do anything to stay on the rim of that abyss and not look into it because it's such a deep abyss. I mean, it really is probably the deepest, darkest abyss you can imagine. So they want to live on the rim of that abyss. They want to look away from the abyss. And so anything that prompts them to look into that abyss is like, oh my God. So when they get a shock in life, like an emotional shock, it forced them to look into the abyss. And when they see how deep that abyss is, there's no feeling that they could survive it. Okay? Because it's, K2 is a black gem. There's this void of blackness, of nothingness with K2. And a K2 moon person is very much aware of that. And so they're desperately trying to not look into it. Okay? They very much are, sense there's huge pain. There's lifetimes of pain down in that hole. And so they don't want to go there. But ultimately, they're going to have to go there at some point. So there's a big black abyss in these people. And I always find these people really intriguing, male or females. When I meet them, I know. I mean, when there's one in the room, I notice them, and I'm watching that person. It doesn't matter how they look or if they're male or female. When there's a K2 moon person in the room, all my attention goes onto that person because, I just, as a counselor, whatever you want to call it, I just see that there's a depth in that person that they're not showing. There's a depth of feeling and stuff in there. There's a huge abyss of stuff in there that just interests me as, because of what I do for my work. So I always wonder about that person. I find them very interesting and very, very intriguing people. And a lot of you guys might notice that too because you're also healers, and you're going to be drawn to that type of energy because there's huge energy in those people that needs to be healed, that they have to get in touch with. There's so many parts of themselves they need to get in touch with that are very scary to get in touch with. And so I just really notice them, and I'd be interested if you guys really notice those people too. But I most certainly have always been able to pick them out very easily in a room. Very intriguing people. So they have a big black abyss with them that eventually they have to go into. But they will resist it because they're trying to stay on the rim where it's safe. But again, the emotions have to be felt. There's a lot of stuff down there they have to allow themselves to feel. And once they allow themselves to feel that stuff, then they'll heal. If they don't want to, that's why they don't want to go to counselors. They don't want you to talk about their feelings and da-da-da-da-da. But life will force them into that hole. Life does force them into that hole through their experiences. Okay. So Rahu Moon conjunction. Any planet that's with Rahu, we're scared we can't get it. So a Rahu Moon person is scared that they can't fulfill their emotional needs. It's just that simple, really. They don't feel they can feel their emotional needs or fulfill their emotional needs. And where do they have to go to the emotional needs? They have to go into the jungle, it's kind of like the moon is the mother, right? And as a baby, you're with your mother, and your mother gives you the comfort and the security, which is what the moon wants. We say the moon is lovesick, okay? It's a really profound statement. But what kind of love is the moon sick for? Is the moon sick for sexual love? No. If it's with Saturn, yeah. If there's a few other things going on, yeah. But the moon by itself is not lovesick for sexual love. It's not even lovesick for romance. It's not lovesick for, that kind of love. The love sickness it's for is a feeling of connectivity and care, comfort, and the security that comes out of that. That's the love sickness the moon wants. It wants the connectivity of being with something that provides for it, cares for it, and nurtures it and loves it. So like the love that the baby has for the mother. The baby's lovesick for its mother. It was in the womb, it was connected. Now it's out of the womb, and it's lovesick for its mother. It wants to be at its mother's bosom, right? That's the lovesickness of the moon. To be enveloped in this beautiful, comfortable, warm, nurturing, caring environment. Okay? And anyone who has an afflicted moon is in need of that experience. Okay? Now, when you got Rahu with the moon, though, the problem is that the mother is in the jungle. So essentially, that's kind of like Mowgli, or Tarzan. That's like being tossed into the jungle hoping that a pack of wolves or a pack of apes is going to come and take care of you and give you that loving comfort. What are the chances of that, right? That only happens in stories. But that's what it feels like to have a Rahu moon conjunction. It literally feels like there's no chance, there's no hope, there's no possibility. It's just a scary concept to even hope for any of that moon's need to be loved. Okay? And so there's such a fear there that the person doesn't want to go into the jungle. So if I told a baby, if I could talk to a baby, and the baby's mother died, let's say, or the baby's mother didn't want her and tossed her out, and I said to the baby, well, baby, you can either just sit here, and be alone, or I can toss you into a jungle and maybe a pack of wolves will decide to raise you. So how about I just toss you out the window and toss into the jungle to those wolves? What's the baby going to say? The baby's going to say, hell no. They're probably just going to eat me. What's the chance of a pack of wolves raising me up? They're probably just going to eat me. That's what it feels like to have a Rahu Moon conjunction. Okay? The result of that is the Rahu Moon person is paralyzed when it comes to fulfilling their emotional needs. Okay? They're literally paralyzed because where they have to go to fulfill their emotional needs feels like the most impossible place on earth that they can ever hope to get met. It feels like the jungle where, unless they meet a really nice wolf, there's going to be nothing but food. Okay? So a person with the Rahu Moon really doesn't want to go into the jungle. They're just scared to go there. They're scared to go to the Rahu house. But they have to go there because that's the only place they're going to get the nurturing. It ain't going to happen anywhere else. They're not going to get that connectivity, that comfort, until they go into the Rahu house. But it just seems like it'll never be, it's not possible. They just do not believe it's possible. And you can argue with these people for hours about how they need to go into their Rahu house and everything will work out okay. And they'll have hundreds of reasons and feelings why, no, that won't actually work for them. And they'll even agree with you if they're an astrologer and say, yeah, that works for other people with Rahu in this house, but not for me, that won't work because this and this reason. So it's very hard. But they've got no choice. Because at the end of it, where our moon is, too much of our consciousness is focused there. So we have to go there. But they can never go there in a completely healthy way. So one example I know is a person who, really interesting, had a Rahu Moon conjunction in the 7th house. And so they have to go into the world of relationships to get the care and comfort and, love that the moon needs. But they're scared to go there. So this person couldn't speak to the member of the opposite sex unless they were a little bit tipsy. They had to have something to subdue their fears. And this is why Rahu Moon conjunctions have a reputation for drinking, drugs, anything that's a stimulation, even cigarettes, anything that's a stimulation to help subdue the fear. And nicotine, of course, chills a person out. It helps a person deal with fears on a minor level. Marijuana will do it on a stronger level. Alcohol does it, So these people, they're just they're doing this to subdue the fear so they can even entertain the thought of going into that jungle where they need to go to find the love and comfort. Okay? This is why Rahu Moon has a reputation for drugs and stuff like that. By itself, it won't cause a person to ruin their lives because of drugs, okay? But if you see a Rahu Moon conjunction and other really strong drug addiction factors, then yeah, those are the people who literally do and can ruin their lives due to addictions, okay? But by itself, it won't do it to that level, but they don't want to go into the jungle without a security blanket, something to comfort them enough to feel like they even could go there. They need to numb that fear to go into the jungle. Now, as they get healthier or a healthier version of a Rahu Moon, will be able to, with the support of other people, someone else is holding their hands, they'll be more inclined to go into that jungle. Okay, so they're like, okay, if you lead me to the pack of wolves who will love me and take care of me, then I can go. But otherwise, I have to get drunk and then just walk out of my door without realizing it. Otherwise, I'm not going into the jungle. So If someone's holding their hand, they can. However, the amount of hand holding they need could be exhausting to other people. So it's not always the best solution because, people have their own lives and anybody can only give so much hand holding to another person before they just don't have the energy anymore. So lots of times these people end up feeling isolated because the people who are there to hold their hands ultimately don't have enough energy to hold their hands. And so again, they have a hard time getting to their Rahu house. The best thing to help with a Rahu moon conjunction or proximity is if Mercury is also close to Rahu or with Rahu. Because like I said, Rahu with Mercury really helps a person go into the Rahu place. It helps them figure out a way to do it in a way that works, a more effective way. And so when you get a person who's got the Mercury there, you'll find them going about trying to find a way to go into their Rahu house in a more intelligent way, in a more capable way, even though they still have all those fears. Okay? If you see someone who has had an addiction problem because of a Rahu moon proximity, then a good Mercury, Rahu in the sign of Mercury with Mercury strong, or Mercury with Rahu or close to Rahu, especially a good dignified or good Lajatadya Vashta Mercury, goes a long ways in helping people start finding a place to meet their needs. The most difficult place to have a Rahu moon is when the Rahu is in the 8th house. In fact, they say Rahu moon in the 8th house is a yoga for insanity. Okay? Why do they say that? Because that's where the fears become the greatest. So it's harder to have a Rahu moon conjunction in the 8th house than any other place that you can imagine. So everything I said about that, all those fears just become deeper fears because, the 8th house is the house of our fears and phobias. And so everything gets amplified there, okay? And so it's very hard for people with the Rahu moon in the 8th to move into a place where they can have their emotional needs met, okay? The lovesick needs that I explained for the moon met. So whenever I see a Rahu moon, the first thing I look for is Mercury. Is Mercury good? Is it in good shape? Is it on the Rahu side? Okay, or is it on the Ketu side? If it's on the Rahu side, it can help Rahu more, of course, right? Does it aspect it? That can help too. If it aspects it, that can make a big difference. A good stolid aspect from a Mercury that's in good dignity, Mercury in good avashtas with Mercury planetary aspecting Rahu can go a long ways because, Rahu and Ketu give the results of their lords and the planets that aspect them. So if you have a good Mercury aspecting Rahu, that will help. Okay, so you want something to do with Mercury. And Mercury, of course, is the child of the moon. And that's why I'm signaling out Mercury this time. A strong Mars, yeah, it'll help. But the thing that helps the most, strong Saturn will help, sure. But the thing that helps the most is the sun, the child of the moon, who is Mercury. Because, and Mercury is also a friend to the moon. So the Mercury wants to help his dad out. So Mercury will help the moon out to its capacity, and the more it's influencing the moon, or the more it's influencing Rahu, the more it's going to be able to help. Okay? And so the conjunction is totally fine. Okay. So the person with the Rahu moon needs to go into the Rahu house, that scary place, to be able to connect to life and the things they need to in life that are going to allow them to feel safe and protected and connected. When a person feels scared, they can't connect, right? When a person doesn't feel safe, when the person doesn't feel nourished and protected, they can't connect in a healthy way. Any efforts they make to connect will be done in unhealthy ways. What are unhealthy ways? Aggressive ways. I've seen people with the Rahu moon become very aggressive in matters of the heart, where they can push and take and abuse the ones they love for the attention they need, because they can't go about it in a healthy way. They can only go about it in an unhealthy way. And one of the unhealthy ways to do it is through aggression. Another unhealthy way is through manipulation. And so these are the ways these people oftentimes try to get their nurturing. If you find one who's very direct and communicative in asking for nourishment and asking for care, then you, without looking at their charts, you can be pretty sure they have Mercury, a good Mercury influencing their Rahu. So that's a really healthy sign when you see a Rahu moon person stumble around trying to get their needs met through with good communication, and that's a sign of a good Mercury, which again is the most important thing to have in the chart if you see a Rahu moon conjunction. Okay, we have a general rule in astrology that to be insane, Mercury and the moon have to both be afflicted. Okay, so we got moon afflicted when it's with Rahu, duh. But if Mercury's solid, it's what keeps the person from being insane. It's what gives them. It's what's going to save them and help them progress, okay? Okay, so look out for the unhealthy ways they try to get their needs met from others. Manipulation, aggression, and so on can very much happen with these people. When Mars is strong, it'll be more aggression. When usually when the, Mars is weak, it'll more often be manipulation, okay? Now, every Rahu moon person, however, does not try to get their needs met in an unhealthy way. A lot of Rahu moon people simply don't try to get their needs met. So you're going to find basically three types. The kind with the Mercury, who tries to get their needs met in as healthiest way as possible, okay? Through communication, through requesting, through intelligent activity. Then you'll get the Rahu moon person who doesn't have the Mercury, and who tries to get their needs met through manipulation and force, okay, and aggression. And then you get the Rahu moon person who simply doesn't try to get their needs met, okay? And these will be very sad people. These will be the people that when you see, you just feel depressed for them because you just see how they're so unhappy and they don't even know where to begin making an effort to find any emotional well-being, okay? So these can be very sad people. And then there's a fourth way they'll do it, and that's with drugs and alcohol and stuff like that, okay? But I know many, I've seen many, because you'll see a lot of Rahu moon people as an astrologer. You'll see tons of these people. I've seen many of the ones who are just, don't even know how to begin getting their, to know how to connect to life in a way that they feel loved and protected and cared for. And they don't know how to move to the Rahu house because there's a lot of factors preventing that. And then you'll get the charts of, so there's just not, they don't have the factors in the chart to really help them move to the Rahu house successfully or early or without a huge delay, okay? So those people are very lost emotionally. Then you'll get the people who have some factors to pull them into the Rahu house, but they don't have a healthy chart. They don't have good Nabhas yogas. They don't have the good Raj yogas. They just don't have a good chart as we talked about. And they're the ones who have a strong Mars will do it with aggression, or if they don't have a strong Mars will try to get their emotional needs met with manipulation. So these people are the people that when you meet you want to run, okay? Because they will hurt the people they're close to too much to try to be with them, okay? And then there's my favorite kind, which are the ones who got the Mercury, so they can reach out, try to get help, try to ask for support intelligently and with a lot more balance. Okay, so I think I covered all four types there. But it's a scary process for all of them. It's so scary to go into that jungle. The last place you can expect care and nurturing. You just won't believe it can happen. So when they're brave and they're fed up and they're suicidal and they have no other choice, then they will hopefully step into that Rahu house and finally get their emotional needs met and find a world that cares about them and protects them and supports them and nurtures them, basically, because what they really, really are looking for is a world that nurtures them. Rahu Moon has a lot of reputation for involving people in fantasy and make-believe and living in their imaginations and that kind of stuff. It can do that too, and the reason is because they're desperately looking for a world that will nourish them, because the world they were born in didn't nourish them. They didn't have the mother, just like Tarzan and Mowgli, they didn't have the mother to give that care and nourishment to them. So somehow, with the Rahu Moon conjunction, not always, but almost every time, you're going to find a lacking in what the mother was able to give. Now that lack can be from very, very many reasons. I've even seen it where the mother was a great girl in lots of ways, but because of the abuse of the father, the mother wasn't emotionally available to be the mother she could have possibly been had she had a better spouse. Okay, so I've seen even that happen where because of the father's misbehaviors, the mother is just in no place to take care of the kid in that nice moon-connected mothering way. Otherwise, it can happen because the mother may just not be present enough. She might not be focused enough. Because the moon is the mother, right? And so when you've got a moon Rahu shows what's false, right? What's not completely there. So the mother is not completely there when you got a Rahu moon conjunction. Somehow the mother's not able to be completely there. And it might just be because of abuse from the spouse, okay? I've seen that a lot, actually. But it could be because the mother herself has a huge Rahu personality where she's just a lost mother, okay? But the mother is just not going to be focused on the child enough to create that comfortable feeling. Then, on the other hand, the moon Ketu person, surprisingly, is so often a lot like their mother. Okay, the moon Ketu person can be so much like their mother. It shocks me sometimes, you know. You get moon close to Ketu or moon with Ketu. It seems like the closer Ketu is to the moon, the more a person's like their mother. The closer Rahu is to the moon, the more different from their mother the person ends up being or tries to be. Okay? I was just shocked with one Ketu moon person I saw how her mom and her just saw eye to each other in how they saw people and how they related to people in such a similar way. I was just like, really? Wow. I was like aghast at the similarity. You know, it's like the way they connected and related to people. It was like there was only one person. There was not two people in the room at all. So a lot with the Ketu moon person, because again the moon is the mother, their identification, what they decide to experience has so much to do with what the mother has decided to experience, okay? And the limitations the mother's been imposed on her. So in lots of ways you could say the Ketu moon person is limited in their into what they can experience emotionally because of the limitations of the mother, where the Rahu moon person doesn't feel they'll be nourished because of the inability of the mother to be there as a present, nurturing, lunar mother force in their lives. Okay? So really interesting things. Of course, there's more on this in the other course, and I recommend you watch that. But these are some of the important things I think I wanted to add in this video. But I think that's... Oh, last thing, Rahu moon. So what's the goal? The goal is to go into the jungle, carve a world into that jungle, and that world will be emotionally nurturing. But the person won't believe it. So they're going to need to get their hands held, they're going to have to be encouraged, they're going to have to be pushed up the hill, because they just aren't going to believe it. It's a fairy tale. It's a fairy tale that you can be, you can fall out of the airplane and land in the woods and get raised by a pack of wolves. That just doesn't happen. So the Rahu moon people, they have to believe in a fairy tale. They need to go watch Pretty Woman over and over and over again and start believing in fairy tales to help encourage them to go into that Rahu house where it feels like there's no possibilities, but it's the only place that the possibility actually exists. There is no other place for them to go, as always. But it's just most difficult for them to believe in. Okay, thank you.